Hung, hi.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Welcome. So listen, we're gonna get
That's
there's a
good
lot.
hair. That's good hair.
Okay, so there's a lot of people here wanting to talk about your
Let's
hair
do
is
it.
crazy.
I love it.
Um,
I'm also sorry about this. It's a disgrace.
but
This is what happens when I don't wear the hat, which is why I've started to wear the hat, but I can't find my hat now.
yeah,
And so you have to deal with it. There's nothing.
Don't need a hat.
Yeah.
absolutely. Okay. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Chad and I had a bit of a disagreement on Twitter about remote working and whether people should get paid the same in different locations. Hung and I had a conversation about it. Julie has an opinion on it. Guys, could you just all give yourselves a quick introduction? Chad, who are you? What do you do?
Chad Sowash, co-host, co-founder of the Chad and Cheese podcast. Been in the industry for 20 plus years, on all sides.
HR's Most Dangerous Podcast. Wear body armor if you're getting involved. Hung?
Yeah. So my name's Hung Lee. I curate recruiting brain food, basically.
Okay. Julie?
Hey, Julie Sowash, Executive Director of Disability Solutions and co-host of the Crazy and the King podcast.
Okay, I just want to quickly stop on that for a second. What's Disability Solutions? People are going to be interested to know.
Yep. Disability Solutions is basically like an RPO for the disability talent pool. We help big companies create enterprise-wide programs to hire talent with disabilities.
Awesome. Okay. It's not a coincidence that Chad and Julie have the same surname. Let's see if it's a coincidence, whether or not they've got the same opinion on this subject. Hung, I just wanted to ask you, first of all, a couple of quick questions. So you've done a lot of study, like vast amounts of study around the subject of remote working. Before we get onto the pay issue, could you just give us your sort of state of the nation? Where are we with remote working and what are the trends and what do you think is likely to happen?
Remote working is working, is the new mantra. This is from Upwork, actually. Is a really good post from the chief economist there. Basically, Upwork obviously is their audience is going to be remote friendly anyway, given the fact it's kind of digital workers already in the gig economy, so to speak. But I'm very much aligned with that. I think we're forced to do it. There's 2 billion people basically had 3 months where they couldn't sort of attend work in the normal way. In that period of time, I think we've had to adapt our game. We had a shock initially. A lot of people were lost in the first couple of weeks, maybe a month or so, but then I think we got into the swing of it. And I think a lot of it is going to be here to stay. So I think this is a seismic shift from how people are going to be doing work, digital work, keyboard work, knowledge work, that kind of thing.
Okay, great. Chad, quickly from you, have you, what are the sort of most notable things that you've seen emerging?
Yeah, I think on this topic specifically, and again, thanks guys for putting this together. This is a topic that impacts, and again, my statements will be made around American policy because that's a good place to at least start, and that's where the topic started in the article, in the Inc. magazine article, and then hopefully we can expound a little bit more on this as it grows. But over 40 million people in the U.S. today are considered working poor. Let that sink in. That's one of the richest countries in the world. Nearly 18% are considered working poor. We're screwing the workers and their families with these types of policies. 60%, nearly 60% of Americans would not be able to cover a $1,000 emergency without some sort of help, which means they don't have $1,000 in their savings account. Impoverished children who aren't in school can't get 3 meals a day. The federal minimum wage hasn't moved in a decade. It's still $7.25 an hour, 40 hours a week. That's $15,000 a year before taxes. An individual's worth is not. And again, this is feeling and watching decades impact of policy. An individual's worth is not calculated on where they live, but rather by the work they perform. And Indiana Workers Code is not worth less than the same code that is written in California. We're screwing workers and their families. While corporate America realizes record profits, it unveils a system that is really rigged to screw workers for bigger margins, stock buybacks, and CEOs who are making 1,500 times that of the workers who are actually creating and delivering the product and or services. Stock buybacks in the last 3 years were close to $3 trillion. Those dollars didn't go to employees. They didn't go to workplace conditions. They didn't go to wages and benefits. They went directly to the rich. So this policy is toxic. And it seems as if we're going to have regulatory action to ensure that unfettered capitalism doesn't continue making the rich richer, the middle and the poor poorer. This isn't only a bad idea, it creates really larger disparity. It locks people into poverty, and it's toxic for any country that adopts it. So we have to stop screwing our workers and their families, which is why I could not, and I can't see any company that needs to embrace this type of unequal pay policy. And that from my standpoint is where I stand and where I'd like to start the debate.
Okay, so it sounds like this specific issue around people earning different amounts of money working in different parts of the same country, working for the same employer, is something to you which is maybe part of a bigger issue, because you've talked about quite a lot of different things there. And I think that reveals some of your political and societal kind of viewpoints. There's a few kind of counter arguments to that, but I'd like to bring Julie in to ask specifically, because in terms of disabled people, I guess that the issue around remote working and how much you get paid is a very important issue with regards to people with disabilities and their ability to work in the same kind of jobs as people without disabilities.
It is, and people with disabilities in this country and probably others have always had a battle around fair equity and fair pay. As you know, it's still legal in many states in the United States to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities. And as we look at a now capable remote workforce in terms of an accommodation, there's going to be a lot of pushback on how people with disabilities who are able to enter the workforce because they are able to work from home have equitable pay for their skills and their time.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions which I'm not sure there's a really great answer to for this, and I'm interested to know what everybody's opinion is. So I said to your co-host on the Chad and Cheese podcast, Chad, that I agreed with him, because Joel said that he thought it was okay to pay somebody different in, I can't remember the locations, but let's say San Francisco compared to North Dakota, if they're doing exactly the same work. I took that a little bit further and said, what about San Francisco versus Guatemala? But yeah, well, why do you think it's, I understand the argument about their code's not necessarily going to be any different in North Dakota versus Guatemala, but is it not a company's right, surely, is it not geo-arbitrage to be able to have your work done wherever you want because of the economic benefits of doing so? Is it not kind of anti-capitalist to suggest that you can't?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is capitalism is great from a market standpoint, but we also have to ensure that we regulate and put guardrails on it. Because if we don't, once again, one of the stats that I shared was over 40 million people in the United States are considered working poor because we allow these types of policies. We allow companies who are actually receiving record profits today to pay their CEOs 1,500 times, 1,000 times that of the individuals who are actually making and delivering the product or the service. So this is one of the big reasons why, again, it sounds great on the surface. Well, it costs less for a house in Indiana, so why don't we just pay you less? The problem is that starts to lock people into poverty. If they're already in poverty and we don't give them an opportunity to get out of it by paying them for their time, which should be equal. And again, if you think about it, if I'm writing code in Indiana and I'm working remote, and I'm working remote in Silicon Valley and I'm writing code, but we're both working remote, it's my decision to live where I live, right? But I'm doing the same work, the exact same work. Not to mention, the question is, and this is the question I posed to you, would you actually charge less for a product if a company was in Indiana? Because they make less, right? So if you're flipping it and saying, well, you live in Indiana, you can afford it, right? Okay, well, if that's the case, let's flip it around. Companies should then pay an equal, or they should ask for a lower cost for companies who are actually based out of those states who are paying lower.
So I believe that is the case, though. So as I understand, I mean, you're talking about specifically within the United States. I have
Yes.
a team of software engineers in Chennai, in India, who,
Mhm.
of course, it costs me a lot less to get work done there than it does in the United Kingdom, where I am. So, it's not a new concept, but I think it sounds like the issue that you have is within a country, because you're talking specifically about the USA. Now, if we
I think
sell
we need
our
to
products,
start small before we go global, right? I think that there are inequities across the globe, but if we have this conversation in our respective countries to be able to start the conversation of what equality looks like and what human rights are, again, that's a discussion that we need to have so that we can pull people out of poverty who are already working 2 to 3 jobs.
okay, so I suppose the poverty issue is a really, really important one. But when we're talking about the big increase that's happened and the big increase that's going to happen of people working remotely, we're not really talking about people working in kind of minimum wage jobs. We're talking about people in sales and people in finance and people in software engineering and things like that. Are we not? Are we not talking more about white collar jobs and therefore, they're paid way above the kind of poverty sort of levels? No?
We have to impact that from the top down, period. Whether it is that, because any regulations that we put in place obviously are going to affect carte blanche whoever is in that state.
Grant's asked, it sounds like the issue in the US is one of an unacceptably low minimum wage. And is the minimum wage the same across different states? That's a really great question.
So there's a federal minimum wage. Julie, you can jump in anytime. There's a federal minimum wage, and then some states who want to be able to bump that up can. But from the federal standard standpoint, which is, again, what we should be doing from a national standpoint to ensure that individuals in Indiana getting paid the same as those in California is still at $7.25 an hour.
So, Julie, I'm going to guess your opinion's similar to Chad's. I'm really interested to hear from you around, are there any other angles to it that you think are worth bringing
Yeah,
up?
I think there are. I mean, really what we're talking about is when compensation structures are built, we are told as employees a lot of time that it is based on cost of living. But what the comp experts know, that it's not based mostly on cost of living, it's based mostly on cost of labor. So cost of labor is determined by an employer self-reporting salary survey. And it's basically what's the going rate for a developer in Indiana versus a developer in San Francisco versus one in the Ukraine. And that creates the geographical base for compensation in most Fortune 1000 companies. So about 86% of companies with more than 10,000 employees are using geograph-based compensation models. And it's not cost of living, it's cost of labor. So the base point is that we have given away our right as employees to say that our labor is equally valued regardless of where we are. And I definitely, I will say I'm a globalist. I get what you're saying about globalization, but we're also seeing the difference between the upper class and the lower class being greater than it ever has been in history. So we're creating political instability through these policies and practices of allowing capitalism to drive the entirety of the comp market. And I think that, one, it's unethical. Two, it's lack of unionization, at least in the United States, that the employee has given up their bargaining rights. And three, especially in the States, where companies are being incentivized through tax incentives, i.e. they're not paying taxes in a state, or they're being given tax credits, that they are then coming in and creating a lower wage environment that does not allow others to rise with it, in order to keep their shareholders happy. So right now, the entire labor market is completely beholden to their shareholders. And that's because we don't have strong regulation in place to keep pay equitable across the board. And I think that is, we're definitely going to see that with remote work. Going back to your point, Adam, is that we're going to be told by our corporations that you're saving money, you're saving time. So now your labor is even less valuable than it was before. And that's why you need to make less money. And really, the company is also saving money, probably substantially more than we will be as remote workers. And we're going to be told that we're being gifted our extra time. And so now we deserve less for that extra time, even though we won't be using extra time in the office.
Right. Companies are saving money on overhead because they don't need the building space. So they're saving money, and that goes to the bottom line and obviously to their board and whomever else. But in this case, they're also trying to play both sides of it. We're going to save money on the overhead swant and because you're working from home, you lucky devil, we're also going to take 20% of your salary. I want to hit on something that Julie just talked about. Amazon has been fighting so hard the unionization of their workers, right? So that their workers cannot have a collective bargaining agreement. Facebook, that's something they sure the hell don't want. Workers by themselves are easy to knock down and to be able to give these different excuses, but from a collective standpoint, if there are collective bargaining agreements set in place, the deterioration of unions in this country to be able to work for the worker as a collective has just gone away. And I see that as one of the issues too. Companies are saving money, pushing you remote, saying it's a benefit, and taking money from you as well, while saying because you live in Indiana, your work isn't as, it's not worth as much because your cost of living is down. Those are two entirely different things. My worth is worth whatever I put out, my product.
Right. Okay. So a couple of things. So Grant has said, this is presumably UK statistics. The average company is saving £11,000 per annum. That's about $15,000. And the average individual is saving about £8,000. It's about $11,000, something like that. But Hung, this isn't this case everywhere. What have we seen in Switzerland recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting to look at different jurisdictions. I think the US is complicated because the federal system means that, a lot of people outside of the US don't understand this at all, in the sense that, there's effectively 50 different economies within the rubric of the US, and they all compete against each other to a large degree by attracting these companies in, obviously giving them sweeteners. So I think that's definitely an ignorance on the part of the international community that we need to backfill. But yeah, different countries have different ways of dealing with it. The Swiss, I think, have got a very interesting court case, which I believe I still haven't had that confirmed by any of my Swiss friends, by the way. So if anybody is in Switzerland and knows anything about this, please do comment and let us know. But apparently, a legal case is in the offing there, which is basically saying that a company that is asking its staff to work remotely is liable to pay the rent. In other words, it's liable for you as an employer to support with the payment of the rent or mortgage that the individual who's now working from home needs to do. So it's basically shifting a little bit of the responsibility away from the individual itself, but into the company as well, which I think is totally fair, because as Grant mentioned there with some of the stats, there is, and as Chad mentioned also, there's big saving for companies. And we've all repurposed our homes as mini offices now, and that's a space in the house that we're not using for other things. Your kids might be in the garage or in the kennel or something, I don't know, to create space for you to work effectively from remote. So that should be comfortable. So I think, yeah, there's going to be some regulatory innovations, hopefully coming from different countries, I think.
Okay, I want to ask a couple of practical questions. So, Chad, for you specifically, the software engineer working for Facebook in Silicon Valley on $200,000 a year, the software engineer working for Facebook in North Dakota on $90,000 per year, because the cost of living is entirely different.
Yes.
Does the person in North Dakota get 200,000, or does the person in Menlo Park get 90,000? How do you equalize this?
So there's already a structure that's put in place, and there's some semantics that I'd like to throw at you. The U.S. military pays their people the exact same, no matter where they live. Okay. So if I was living in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which I did, the cost of living there is so much lower than somebody in Fort Ord, California, but I got paid the exact same as another E4 or E5 doing the exact same job. Now, the way that you counterbalance this is that you actually have a cost of living adjustment, which is different, okay? The beautiful part about this is it's transparency. One of the things that we lack is transparency, and which hurts equity, right? And there's huge disparity because we don't know what everybody's getting paid. So in the military, we always know what everybody else is getting paid, because if you see it on their rank, if you're the same rank, you're getting paid the same. But there's a cost of living adjustment. What can happen at that point is that both individuals get paid the same salary, but yet everybody is in that headquarters location, let's say in Silicon Valley, get a cost of living adjustment. The engineer doesn't get any more cost of living adjustment than the person who is doing maybe tech admin or something of that nature. That's more of an entry level. That's a way for us to be able to start to understand what equity looks like, and then start to also understand and look at transparency. The U.S. military and government has done this for, I'd say, probably over a century, right? It's a way for us to look at and ensure that we are being fair across the board to all of our people, and also know that they're not living in poverty and they're not a part of that 40 million who are working one or two or more jobs who are still in poverty.
Okay.
I would say I agree with
sorry, go on,
a
Julie.
little bit. I agree with transparency. Full pay transparency is something that we need in the United States for sure. But I think the cost of living adjustment is just another way to shroud pay inequity based on geography. The pay is the pay, and I'm not a comp expert, so I won't get into the practical of which pay is the pay. But by equalizing pay across the states or across the positions, at least in every state, you allow a remote worker to live wherever they want to, which will allow them, if you're in North Dakota and you make $200,000, you're going to be able to create a lot more jobs with your spend. And North Dakota is going to be able to attract a lot higher level of talent because the cost of living is lower for that same $200,000. Right now, we have a density problem in this country where everyone lives on the coast, because beaches are great, but also because they get paid a lot more. And that's created this shell in the middle where we are lacking in talent, because it's so important to make enough money to be able to live. And you can't do that if you're paid differently in the middle versus the coasts.
Okay, so Bethan's made a point, which is in the UK, the way they tend to do things is that if you've got a role which it could exist anywhere in the UK, really, if you choose to be in London, or if your role is in London, then you get a weighting. I think that's kind of what you've just covered, Julian said. You don't like the idea of that. It's just another way of paying people more in different locations.
Yeah, it's a crude solution that the UK has got for that. But to Julie's point on this, that there is this economic sort of phenomena of agglomeration, effectively, which you and I have talked about before, Adam, which is essentially this accumulation of economic wealth in certain cities, and it's a virtuous and vicious circle at the same time. Because if you need to get on and you want to make a lot of money, of course you go to New York, San Francisco, or somewhere where there's enough opportunity flow, if you want to use kind of startup speak, so that for you to start getting these opportunities, increasing your so-called value, which of course then increases the rent, which means, you know, wages need to go up, and it all just keeps spiraling on like that. London is like this, any kind of major cities like this. Now, I think one of the main things that we're going to see with remote working, which is why I'm a big proponent of it, is that it should stop and it should reverse urban agglomeration. It should mean that people are able to continue and to do their work without necessarily needing to relocate to a major city center, and actually to, you know, exacerbate that density problem that Julie was mentioning at the beginning.
So do you think agglomeration will start to become to do with the employer itself, and all of the best minds want to work for Candidate ID, for example, or, you know, whichever company it might be, and that's the impact of agglomeration as opposed to the location driven sort of gravity?
Yeah, I mean, agglomeration might actually not occur with geography at all. You know, we'd be attracted to individuals, maybe in a digital sense, like who do we want to hang out with more, who are prominent online, or some other kind of issue. But I think this does definitely help, because if you look at the political movements that we've seen over the last decade or so that have manifested in the likes of Donald Trump, Brexit, Boris Johnson, everywhere in Europe, it's essentially a response to that agglomeration effect. It's that middle part of the so-called left behind that are reacting to that and saying, we want to stop this. Now, it so happens that it took a virus to do it. But the virus has taught us that actually we can work from remote. Geographical proximity isn't the most important thing. And what will happen is that companies, I think, will shift very hard to the remote working as default. Now, to Chad's point, I mean, yes, a lot of this is money saving stuff. A lot of it is, you know, potential exploitation, and, you know, I get all of that. But at the same time, I think it will attack this mega trend that I think is probably the root cause of a lot of our problems in a much deeper sense. So I'm broadly for, even if there's going to be some of these teething problems that we're going to have to encounter as we get there.
That's been really great. Listen, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it here. It's been short and sweet. This was really a conversation starter. I absolutely appreciate your perspectives. Chad, you have changed my mind a bit, I've got to say. So first of all, I'd like to thank Chad and Cheese from the Chad and Cheese podcast. I'd like to thank Hung Lee from Recruiting Brain Food, and Julie Sowash from Disability Solutions, and fresh from the United Nations, where she was presenting a few months ago. So very privileged to have you all on board, and thanks for that. I hope everybody's found it interesting, and thanks for all your comments as well. Cheers, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.